Welcome. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Josh. Thanks for the opportunity.
So early voting starts in just a few days, but more than a third of Democratic voters in polls say they're undecided. What do voters need to know about you, and why do you deserve their vote?
Well, Josh, I've served in the legislature as a volunteer for the last 18 years, just pushing back against the extremism of the Republican Party. And in all of that time, gotten great things done. Created the National Center for Warrior Resiliency for veterans to wean themselves off of opioids. Created the Farmer Suicide Prevention Act. Sid Miller came into the session, this session, and said we saved 61 lives because of my amendment. Now that program is being copied by 35 states. We've created a hospital in South Texas in San Antonio, and so we'll continue to do all of those things. But more importantly, I think that this campaign, our campaign, is truly about what ails people. It's about the pain of those families in Uvalde that lost their children. The gun violence, loose Republican gun laws have put us where we are. It's the pain of women that can't make reproductive decisions for themselves. And it's certainly the pain of just trying to make ends meet. And I think that Washington politicians have forgotten all of that. The ability to be able to pay your bills and pay your mortgage and try to figure out how in the world you're going to put your kid through college. That's what this campaign's about.
Certainly a lot of topics I want to hit on, but I do want to start with immigration. It's one of the top concerns for Texas voters. You've talked about the need for comprehensive immigration reform, and still have other candidates in this race. But for you, what does comprehensive immigration reform really mean? What policies does that entail?
Yeah, if you go to Roland for Texas, you'll see a 5-point plan. So first off, I'm the son of immigrants. I'm an immigration lawyer, and I represent about 400 miles of this U.S. border, including Eagle Pass. And we've seen how Greg Abbott's movie theater set has come ebbed and flowed as far as migration. The fact is we've had migration patterns for 100 years and beyond in this state. We've got to fix our broken H-2A and H-2B visa system, incorporate a program like mine, a country of origin program that says that you apply for your job in El Salvador or Nicaragua or wherever. You go to the U.S. consulate, you go to a Department of Labor kiosk, you get background checked, and in 90 days, your new employer brings you to the United States, as is current law under H-2As and H-2Bs. These asylum seekers are not asylum seekers, they're job seekers. And every economist will tell you we need 30 million jobs to fill for jobs that Americans don't want to do. We are an aging country. We need to look at this in a real way and look at the other elements of my comprehensive immigration reform plan, and you'll see that it secures the border, fixes our economy, and safeguards Social Security.
Yeah, let's drill down just a little bit there on that point. The push for immigration reform is a long process, obviously. For now, what immediate steps do you believe should be taken to alleviate concerns about people crossing the border?
Well, I'll tell you what we shouldn't be doing. We shouldn't be signing resolutions like my opponent has done with crackpot Republicans, calling Joe Biden an open borders president, because that doesn't do anything. It doesn't do anything, doesn't fix anything, doesn't acknowledge anything. That entire resolution was chock full of lies. We've got to do real things. And if so far as getting people away from the border, right now there was 4 people that crossed in Eagle Pass last week. A country of origin program solves those issues. If you look at the 5th point in my plan, we spend money on the DEA to go after cartels in Mexico. We did this in the 80s in Colombia, and we were successful at taking down the most dangerous cartels in the world. We can do that again in a real way, but we've got to expand visas. We've got to look at how we train the best and brightest in the world and then send them back home. If you go to Roland for Texas, I promise you, you will see a deliberate 5-point plan that immediately secures the border. And by the way, sure, we need to spend more money on immigration judges and prosecutors. And the congressmen and other people in Washington can do that, but they don't want to solve this problem. They just want to pander about it.
You touched on this point earlier, and obviously it's been a big focus for you, especially in recent times after Uvalde, but gun violence is now the leading cause of death for children in our country. As a potential senator from this state, how do you see yourself advancing or advocating for gun safety measures?
Well, I've exhausted myself talking about guns. You see, Josh, I've seen all of those kids dead. I sued the government. I needed to see where the failure was. And when I signed on the dotted line of their non-disclosure agreement, I got hundreds of hours of body cam footage. And I've seen every cop when they say there's an AR-15, there's an AR-15, there's an AR-15. They were afraid of the gun. And so I will exhaust myself talking to people across this nation about how cops are in fear of an AR-15 and why we need an assault weapons ban with certain exceptions. The fact is, you're right. It's the leading cause of death of children in the world. We lead the world. We can change that. We can fix that. Those kids died like we trained them. Shut the lights off, close the curtains, go huddle together. They died in 2 piles in one classroom with one teacher dead on top trying to shield her kids, one barely living. She died in an ambulance outside of that classroom, outside of that school, because so many cop cars caused so much congestion they couldn't get her out of there.
Another point of violence that many Americans are talking about these days is what's happening in the Middle East. If you were sitting with President Biden in the Oval Office now, what would you recommend he do about the civilian death toll in Gaza and the risk of wider war in the Middle East?
My opponent says that Israel should keep bombing. I have called for a ceasefire on this station over 6 or 7 weeks ago, and I'll continue to do that. It's a very short-sighted view to say that Israel can go on and keep bombing. The fact is, Israel and the Middle East is a powder keg, and you have to understand Lebanon, you have to understand Yemen, and you have to understand Iran. And you have to understand that this is World War III if we don't stop it. Benjamin Netanyahu is not Yitzhak Rabin. He's never wanted peace, ever. We must have peace in the Middle East, and this president must exhaust himself to do that. We must not give more aid to Israel unless they show us a plan for immediate peace on how we're going to stop this madness. You know, killing 30,000 people doesn't bring justice to those 1,200. And you should still be able to go in a police-like manner and hunt those people down. But you shouldn't bomb women and children with impunity like they have done over and over again for the last 4 months.
You know, switching gears, another controversial topic, abortion is essentially banned in Texas. If you are elected to the Senate, what steps would you be willing to take to codify abortion access?
Everything, by any means necessary. Number one, we should break the filibuster in the United States Senate. We should not let Chuck Schumer and others use a procedural rule to keep us from fixing that issue, fixing the gun violence that's happening across this country. And we should also look at expanding the Supreme Court. The only reason that we got to 9 circuits in 1869, to 9 judges, because there was 9 circuits. There's 13 circuits now. We deserve a Supreme Court that's not bought and paid for, one that has real ethics and real transparency. We're not there right now, Josh. We've got to keep pushing.
When it comes to healthcare, do you favor or oppose the creation of a single payer system, often referred to as Medicare for all?
I have been talking about Medicare for all forever and a day. It's also a problem that is unique to this nation. Politicians in Washington, like my opponent in the primary, he used to be for Medicare for all, and now he's not. The fact is, most leading countries in the world have a single payer system. But Washington politicians, they like the steak dinner so much with those lobbyists, with United Healthcare, with Blue Cross Blue Shield, with Aetna and others, that they don't want to get away from private pay insurance. We would save $30 trillion in the next 10 years in a Medicare for all system. And that's cost savings for people. More importantly, families can put money back into their pockets. The out-of-pocket cost of health care in this country and in this state is breaking working class families, and that is why we need Medicare for all.
Let me ask you about this. Former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley says politicians over 75 should be required to take mental competency tests. Do you agree, and should we have term limits for Congress the way we do for presidents?
Well, let's talk about the first thing, because that's a dog whistle, obviously, against our president. This president has been more successful than the last 8 presidents before him legislatively, save and except perhaps Bill Clinton. This president has done more legislatively than any other president in our modern times. And so that's the first thing. So Nikki Haley should probably go look at her own mental acuity before she goes off and drags President Biden under the bus. Secondly, Ted Cruz has talked about term limits. I obliged him this last session. I filed a bill so that we can have our federal term limits to 2 years on United States senators, to 2 terms rather, 12 years. I think that at some point we should have that discussion. When you have senators that are getting to be 90 and 100 years old, it's not so much the mental acuity piece. It's the fact that they have gotten so far deep into the pockets of big lobbyists that they have forgotten what people are going through in their own communities. I still go to the H-E-B. I still go to do my grocery shopping, and I talk to people every week about their pain, about what they're going through, about how they're going to put their kids through college. That's why I was endorsed by the UT Young Democrats, because we have a 100% tax credit program. For every dollar of their debt, they get a tax credit. We have to have real solutions to the problems that people are facing. We've got to figure out how to make life a little bit better to live. Right now, the Washington, D.C. politicians on both sides of the aisle don't care about people back at home. I'm going to keep working for them like I always have, and I'll come back to create real change in this state.
Timely topic here. This week marks 3 years since the deadly winter storm of 2021 and the prolonged blackouts that happened. While a number of reforms did get enacted at the state level in the wake of that, what role do you see that the federal government should play in creating a more reliable grid here in Texas?
The state reforms that were put in place were largely paybacks to big energy companies that Republicans pushed forward. And sure, some of us voted for them under the idea that it was going to be winterization. But in the end, most of that money, they went off and went back to their shareholders. I successfully put on an amendment in the Senate in 21 to give people a rebate. That rebate was stripped out in the House. Even Dan Patrick agreed with me on that $360 rebate. Sadly, today you saw Congressman Kassar file a bill that ties on to the eastern and western grid, a great bill. And sadly, you see my opponent, Colin Allred, refuse to sign on to that bill. That bill would safeguard people here in Texas when we have those cold spells. Just like we had 3 weeks ago when ERCOT told us it's going to be close. You got to tell your constituents to preserve their energy. Come on. We've got to do better for people. We need a nation and we need a state that works. We need an energy commission that works. We need to have our kids not be so scared about going to school. We need to have women that should have reproductive freedoms. We need to have children that are going to college know that they're not going to get choked economically. When you are simply backing the interests of the Chamber of Commerce like my opponent in this primary does, you end up not helping any of those people I just talked about.
So to be clear, you are saying that you would support federal legislation to interconnect Texas to the other two grids in our nation?
I would support Congressman Kassar's efforts to tie on to those two grids. It's important to note that people in El Paso are tied onto the western grid and they had no blackouts, and people in East Texas had no blackouts. But the rest of us that are under ERCOT, we suffered, and we suffered greatly. Congressman Kassar's bill is a good one, and Congressman Allred should have signed on it, but he has refused.
Right now, there is a lot of concern about the state of our democracy. Many people of all political beliefs think the country is on the wrong path, and our elected leaders get a lot of that blame. To any Texan watching, why are you the candidate that they should vote for and put their trust in you?
I think people are frustrated. They're so frustrated. I ran into a woman named Antonia Molina in Harlingen. She's in her 70s, living on $760 a month in Social Security. How in the world she's supposed to make ends meet with that? It's an impossibility. You have people that are frustrated trying to figure out how they're going to send their kids off to college, how they're just going to pay the out-of-pocket medical bills. All of those frustrations are not answered by anybody in Congress. You've got Washington politicians that just want to stay there and go to the steak dinner with the lobbyists. I'm 53 years old. I'm not 42 like my opponent. This isn't ambition for me. We've got to change this world. We've got to do something better for my kids and everyone's kids out there. This isn't about personal gain. It has to be about how we are going to change this state and this country for the good of all. And I believe I've done that. I will exhaust myself. Just like I've exhausted myself for those families in Uvalde. I will exhaust myself for all Texans so that we can create a positive movement in this state once and for all.
Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you.